morning, Matt.
Good morning, sir.
I must confess, this is meant to be an accountancy firm, but the food is of such quality, the tea and the croissants, I did mistake it for a top-of-the-range hotel or restaurant, so fantastic.
Well, welcome, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for it, which is that when we invested in 1 Chamberlain Square, we wanted to make this place at the time a work home, not an office.
Interesting.
We banned the word office, in fact, as part of our design ethos. We wanted to make it a destination. We wanted it to be distinctive. We wanted the experience to be different for people every day, and that even went down to the restaurant experience. So in the run-in to our move into 1 Chamberlain Square, and we were only in for 2.5 months pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
In the run-in to that, we talked with our catering team and the welcome team that have greeted you this morning, and we wanted to make it a different experience for visitors, including what we supply them with in terms of food and drink. Partly because we wanted that to be more about health and well-being. So in the early part of the spring last year, before we all started working from home predominantly, if you wandered into the restaurant, it would be full of, there was a protein area, there was a greens area. It very much was a far more thoughtful approach to food, drink, well-being, space, natural light throughout the building, and creating genuinely a different experience.
So different from what people think of an accountancy firm. So different.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, we're multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
We've got so many different people from different walks of life that are part of our overall team, and giving them the best experience, the best facilities that we can, giving our clients the best experience, giving the communities that we serve the best experience that we can, runs right the way down through the thought, even in terms of the student recruitment area, where we obviously do a lot of student assessments, school leavers as well as graduates. The design of those rooms is that the walls are porous to noise, so that when the students are doing their pre-joining assessments, they're actually experiencing a real workplace as opposed to an examination room. There's a lot of thought in the design, and it would take me several hours to explain it to you completely.
Well, before we move on to the question, let me just make one other observation, apart from the food being fantastic. They say you can understand the culture of an organisation by the very first person you meet. And so as we stepped into the reception from the car park, fantastic, the people who greeted us.
Yep.
And that said everything.
Yep.
So when it comes to culture, you measure by the very first person and they were brilliant. So listen, well done. So it appears you've got the whole package. So for those of you who don't know where I am, who I'm speaking to Matt Hammond. He's the head of international markets at PwC, one of the top 4 firms in the world, and he's a senior partner for the Midlands, based in Birmingham. And by the way, the reason we're talking about this office, it was a real coup for the city to get a big firm like PwC setting up a big office. You've seen the growth of PwC's investment in the Midlands over 5 years, and you've created 1,000 new jobs during those 5 years, and you lead a team of 3,000 people across the Midlands, West and East. You're a deals and restructuring partner with 30 years' experience, and you're a chair, and I know you well, from the West Midlands Growth Company. And for those of you who don't know what the West Midlands Growth Company is, they interact with major stakeholders in the region, which include universities, inward investors, and local government. And you clearly got something right to come here, because I did my first degree in finance and accountancy, and the accountancy profession told me where to go. So you did clearly something right to get to the heady heights that you have. So tell me, I heard a rumour you're Welsh.
That's true as well.
So what brought you to this neck of the woods?
What brought me to the neck of this woods and those roads? Well, look, first of all, thank you for those kind comments around where we're at as a business as well. We did set out a vision 5 years ago to grow the business here very significantly. And the physical infrastructure is an important part of it. Yeah. But it's the creation of new roles, recruiting people from Midlands universities and schools. That's the really pleasing bit. And actually, even when you said that, then we've created 1,000 new jobs over that time. We have, and that landmark took place in September of last year. Wow. So in the midst, essentially, of a pandemic. Yeah. So we recruited a record number of students and school leavers into the Midlands last year. 270 plus, and it's just a joy to see that number. Actually, we can look at all sorts of other things about revenues and the like, but actually to see that many people based here in Birmingham and in the wider Midlands business is great. I first came to Birmingham on the 4th of January 1993. That's when I started my career here.
Okay.
And at the time, I was working with a mid-tier firm. Had great experience for 4 years. I can still remember the first client I went out to, which was just off the High Street in West Bromwich on the 4th of January 1993.
Okay.
Which was a business that needed restructuring. And that's when I started doing restructuring work. It's been quite a long time, I suppose, in restructuring. Over that time, I've seen 3 or 4 recessions. But the bit that, as a restructuring practitioner, the bit that also really interests me is putting some counterbalance into what I do, which is the growth part.
Yeah,
it's the growth bit that I really enjoy.
Yeah. And it's almost reverse, isn't it? You're recovering something, but at the same time you're trying to grow something.
Yeah.
It's just quite an interesting combination, isn't it?
But that's what Okay, so most of the businesses that I will deal with directly will be in some form of financial stress or distress in terms of what I do in the restructuring world.
Yeah.
What is not well enough understood is that most of those businesses are restructured and sold to a new party that will take them forward, that will grow them. And I could talk about numerous of those cases and situations. But that's why I also took a role with the West Midlands Growth Company. I felt that I didn't feel it was legitimate for me to take a role with the Growth Company unless I'd spearheaded our own growth and investment in the region first. And if as an investor, as a firm in the region, and look, we've been in Birmingham for over 100 years, much like many of the financial institutions around us, the heritage and history of Midland Bank, now HSBC, Lloyds Bank, both started in this city. We go back over 100 years in Birmingham and the West Midlands as well. But for us, it's like, what's our next level of growth and trajectory? And so the growth company part of that is really interesting. Obviously, the West Midlands has been very successful in terms of the level of inward investment. That's foreign direct investment and inward investment from other parts of the UK. Actually, since the financial crisis of 2008-9. And it would be great to think that we could repeat history with a sharp recovery. That's what the growth trajectory is about. That's what the growth discussion is about. And actually, I think we're perfectly well placed. So why, as a Welshman, am I in Birmingham? I've always just found it a super friendly place. I've always said that it's big enough to really matter, where we can be really well connected, but small enough so that everybody knows one another really well. I mean, if you could go around the Cornwall Business District, increasingly Paradise through to Brindley Place, over the course of the next decade, down to Curzon. The growth of the city, I think, is fantastic, and it's always been a place, I think, that has welcomed people from all walks of life and literally all parts of the world. So making the journey from sort of South Wales to Birmingham is actually not anything like the sort of leap that many of our friends and colleagues in the region have actually made, right? Because we welcome people from across the world, and we'll have a unique opportunity to do that, of course, later this year as we build up towards City of Culture and then, of course, Commonwealth Games in 22. So I think it's a great place, and you can't fail but be I think impressed, and certainly visitors to the city and the region who hadn't been for some time pre-pandemic, when they've come back just before, going, wow, this has changed. The landscape has changed here. And of course, there's a lot of people that are based normally in the city centre that have been away for pretty much 12 months. When they come back, they're going to see pretty much, again, a change in landscape, more development, more facilities, and hopefully the resurgence of the city beyond 22 as well.
Well, 3 observations. Firstly, I think from a perception perspective, people saw the fact that it wasn't London-centric anymore. The PwC came in. That was interesting, almost aligns with the levelling up agenda. So that was the first thing. Perception was really important. Secondly, a big operation coming into the city was quite important. People forget professional services are one of our greatest exports. So the fact that you're creating 1,000 jobs is a multiplier effect. And of course, it's the nature of the jobs as well, and the fact that we're saying to the next generation there is still great employment and great opportunity. So I think fantastic if I take all those factors into account. So look, we're talking about everything positive, which is really, really good, and you're doing some great things, and PwC are part of that big picture. But now let's go to the last 12 months. It's been tough. You've said, this place is virtually empty. We walked in, the car park was empty.
Yep.
We walked straight up, it was still empty, saw a couple of people. So how do you think, and PwC are a good barometer because you've got your finger on businesses you look after. So how do you think leaders have had to adapt in the past year? And then once we've sort of answered that, I want to pick up some of the comments you made. Brilliant article in the Business Influencer magazine, and we'll pick up some stuff from there. So how have leaders had to adapt? Because you've got a really good eye on what's going on in the region.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, on the levelling up agenda, I think this region's really well placed, and as businesses we can take decisions quite quickly that are also about levelling up. So you mentioned, and we talked about what we've done here in Birmingham. I could equally reference what we're doing in Belfast.
Nice.
Where we have a supersize office, actually slightly bigger than Birmingham. It will open at the end of this calendar year, hopefully. Likewise, excuse me. I can look at where we've deliberately taken steps like our Bradford office. We didn't have a Bradford office, all right, but it was an economic cold spot. And actually, we've built a new office there, recruited local people to do jobs that are important to our overall business on a UK-wide and even international basis. So I think it's incumbent on businesses to accelerate that levelling up, and the opportunities I think that people have rethought over the last 12 months about where they are, where they're close to, what they want to do. That whole kind of rethink and reconfiguration of people's lives has taken place in a way that we probably don't yet fully understand. But in terms of leadership and how leadership has adapted, I'd go a step further. I don't think it's just leadership. If you think about, if I think about the team of senior leaders that I engage with across our business, each and every one of those individuals has got an established network. They've got established clients that they work with. They have an established stakeholder group, and for them, actually, the adaptation was not about differences in networks. There were differences in interaction. There were differences in communication, particularly to teams. But equally, I think people across businesses at whatever level and organisations have had to adapt really rapidly. I mean, I think the degree of adaptation and agility shown by our new joiners is incredible. You think about leaving school or leaving university, coming into a working environment and trying to become embedded and part of an organisation and a culture whilst actually never physically being in the same place. So our recruitment year group of 2019, 2020 and now 21, the adaptation they're going through is, I would say, much more marked than the adaptation that as a group of leaders we're going through. And we're probably... if you describe the various phases of lockdown, lockdown one, my view of lockdown one was everybody was in it together. There was adrenaline was running really high. It was a crisis. Those of us who are involved in crisis leadership, we did the reset. We got on with what we needed to do, and for 3 or 4 months it was hectic. It passed really quickly. I actually think the last lockdown has been more difficult for everybody.
The third one?
Yeah, the third lockdown, which obviously, from the turn of the year until just about now. I think that's been more difficult for a number of reasons. First of all, there is this sort of monotony of it through the seasons as well. I think it came at a particularly tough time of the calendar year anyway.
Yeah.
It came at a very busy point in time for a lot of businesses. I mean, let's not forget that, the turn of the year was also when Brexit got done, essentially, right? We've been through all of that.
And we'll pick that up later on.
So I think, the number of complex situations and challenges that have been, that organisations and individuals had to face has been, I think, quite extraordinary. But more than that, one of the things that for me has been the adaptation that people have seen is how quickly people have had to build trust in one another at a different level. So gone are the days of presenteeism, as many people will have seen it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that the reverse in some respects is that there's been much more presenteeism, because presenteeism is now just on screens typically.
Yeah.
And actually it's quite odd sometimes if somebody's on a call on a screen but actually not on a screen. All of those little behaviours that have changed.
You look at the 3,000 people. How did you have to adapt? That's a lot of people, 3,000 people. How did you adapt?
It is a lot of people, but we adapted. We adapted nationally and locally in a very accelerated way. So, first of all, let's be really clear. Our board guides us through and makes the key decisions on our approach to our operations, day-to-day activities, communications, our stance on policy, what we're going to do in terms of following all the public health guidance and navigating our way through the situation for our colleagues and for our clients. And there are three words, I suppose, that we've used just recently in reflection about what we're now doing and how we've adapted, and that's speed, care, and imagination. So if you think about the acceleration of what's happened over the last 12 months, it's meant that decisions have had to be taken almost instantaneously. Things that people in businesses will have agonised over for months with numerous committees, subcommittees and papers have been done almost instantaneously. That's been refreshing. All right. The imagination bit is, businesses that hadn't, for example, gone through digitisation and digital transformation were going to get caught out really badly if they hadn't. There are clients that were behind the curve on that have actually accelerated really quickly and got ahead of the curve. There are some that were already ahead and have gone even further ahead and had to readapt their models completely. And then the care bit, I think, has come through in probably the most significant way, which is we've had to go above and beyond where we might have been in terms of pastoral care into a whole different environment now around the safety, health and well-being of colleagues and clients. And as you've come into One Chamberlain Square this morning, imagine 18 months ago we thought there'd be stickers on the floor and masks on our faces. We've all had to think very, very carefully through that, and we will go carefully through the next 6 months as well, until such time as hopefully all of the the restrictions are relaxed. So that adaptation, I think, has taken place everywhere. Lastly, on communication, and this goes to the speed and imagination piece as well, which is that we, in addition to the national level communications, at a local level, we very much focused on what I would call sort of broadcast type journalism to our team. We have 2 or 3 sessions a month. We have a leadership team panel, but increasingly with that, we are encouraging younger members of our team to share their experiences about the clients they've been working on, what they've been doing, how they've navigated things themselves. We have a regular standing orders on every month on inclusion and diversity, and then the third dimension to it has been that our sports committee, who in the past used to organise what you might regard as sort of interdepartmental games or competitions with other professional services firms and other clients, have moved from being that into a group of people that is leading the charge on bringing content to our people that is very much about their health, well-being as well. So we dedicated quite a lot of time to that.
So just a quick couple of questions again on leadership around that. How do you measure, in the absence of meeting people and seeing them on screens, if somebody walks in, you can tell by the body language whether they're in a good place or not. Now they're remote, you see them, bit of them on a screen, you can't really read the body language. You've got your intake, who rely desperately on meeting partners, learning from them, being mentored. They're isolated. How do you sense check where the well-being is of your staff? How do you know we seem to be doing okay, everybody seems okay, but how do you measure that, or do you just gut feeling? Do you have metrics that measure that?
I think it's more complex than metrics. So we've got lots of metrics that we look at. First of all, in terms of productivity of our people, productivity has increased quite significantly over the course of 12 months. As a professional services business, you're well aware of exactly what time people are working and with which clients, etc. So that's capable of being measured, but that's not really a measure of well-being.
No, that's right.
All right. So the important thing around productivity is that it's smoothed out over the course of the last 12 months. So there were peaks and troughs within days and weeks previously, but people have adapted to a different working style, some of which is good, some of which, and we've all seen it, we've all felt it, we've all experienced it. What may have been commuting time in the past and may have been that time to check out a little bit, listen to some music, read a book, read the paper, that
listen
time
to
listen
to you on a podcast?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Listen to you on a podcast?
Indeed, yeah, that's been compromised. Okay, so because people are then having their days extended, the check-in around well-being has to be far more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And that comes down to a number of different things. Proximity of relationships. In particular, having, rather than team sort of plenary type sessions, lots of one-to-one conversations. I think, secondly, in terms of metrics, your question around metrics, we've surveyed our staff through our pulse surveys more in the last 12 months, more frequently than probably any other time.
Yeah.
And the real reason we're doing that is because we want our team to have their voice about what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what changes they want to embed, how they want to work going forward. And of course, with over 22,000 people across the UK, you're going to get a wide variety of different outlooks and situations. We do have and take very seriously the support, the health and wellbeing support that we provide to our staff in terms of expert medical support and insight. So at a national level, we have had a number of medical experts, clinical experts that have done live stream sessions with our people around the UK. In fact, if my memory serves me correctly, going back to, I think it was probably week 2-3 of lockdown 1, we had around 10 or 11,000 of our colleagues around the country on one single Google live stream broadcast, which goes to the communication point. But as those have developed, we've brought in experts to help brief people on what to look for. What are the signs we can look for in ourselves? Because we need to be good at diagnosing ourselves.
Yeah.
And what are the signs that we can look for in others? And there are some simple things that we can all watch out for. So, core to our values is care. And unless people are looking out for one another and themselves day in, day out, knowing what the little signs are, then it would be difficult for us to really live the values truly that we do. And look, we've had, like most businesses, we've had any number of people, and it's indiscriminate, whether it, senior right the way through to the most recent joiners and juniors. The impact of the pandemic has been different on different people.
Yeah.
And we've seen some acute issues that we've had to help people manage through and care for people through that period as well. And of course, what it has done is the last 12 months has created, I think, a safer environment, a more understanding environment around situations that people may have been experiencing either at a personal health level or at a unregistered carers, for example, that are colleagues of ours, that for whom they'd not previously talked about that, but for whom that has become a really important part of what they've been about for the last 12 months.
Do you think you've become, and then we'll move on to the next one, do you think you've become more of a coach during pandemic as a result of the very things you're just speaking about, the softer nature of relationship managing people? So have you become, do you think, more of a coach, and suddenly you're now recognising the importance of stuff that maybe we've just never had to?
Yeah, I mean, that question of itself causes quite a lot of reflection, doesn't it? Because, when I look across our business, there are, genuinely so many people that are in coaching roles, or where, part of their day job is coaching.
That's right.
That could be coaching through reverse mentoring, because the assumption actually with coaching is that it's top down, and it's not.
No.
There's a lot of reverse mentoring that takes place. There's a lot of peer-to-peer coaching and mentoring takes place. There's a lot more. I would suggest, rather than coaching, formal coaching, a safe comparison of views and experiences from clients to ourselves and vice versa. What are you doing about this lockdown? What are you doing about the return to work? What are you going to do with your footprint? What are you going to do with your people in terms of technology? And all of those they're sort of mini experiences of coaching conversations. I love coaching people. Right, I really enjoy it. It's brilliant, that we're able to continue through the course of the last 12 months to invest in our people. So, yes, we did, like most businesses, have to delay certain of our promotion cycles, for example, for 6 months. Yeah. But we've continued to invest in recruitment, promotions that were then deferred, and the investment in our partner team going forward. So all of that requires day-to-day coaching for people to progress, and various of us have had to coach ourselves, one another's, or families and friends through situations. We've all experienced, I think, a very unique last 12 months.
Looking at leadership, we're now working in a global connected world, which has been tested through the pandemic. And of course, PwC, you've got your tentacles right around the globe. So I was intrigued by your recent CEO survey, and then we'll come back local again. Yep. But because we can't live in isolation, and particularly with the pandemic, because we can't now just work on our own, we've got to make sure the world is working together to combat this global thing. So, you've done a recent CEO survey, of which the details will be in the next issue as well. Globally, 76%, your survey said, of CEOs are positive about a global economic comeback. The IMF yesterday has revised its growth projections to 6% 2021 and 4% 2022. There's a disparity around the globe in those who are developed countries, which obviously, because of the vaccine and the support, like the furlough, has meant they'll probably grow quicker. Developing countries, particularly like Africa, who can't get access to vaccines and perhaps haven't been well positioned to support the workforce, they're growing at a slower rate. So we do have a two-speed recovery. Tell me, that was something I picked up, but what else did you find from the CEO survey that would help us understand and navigate the world that's in front of us, certainly for the next 24 months?
Yeah, 24 months, and I'd say probably, in reality, probably 5 years.
Okay.
And why do I say that? Partly because of the vaccine challenges that you highlight there, Ninder, which is, the UK is more advanced than we can have imagined, maybe, but are we ever going to get to a full global vaccination? Unlikely, and even to an extent of coverage would take several years with variants, etc., that are multiplying. So I think we've got to learn to adapt, to live with this in different ways. So why do I think CEOs are optimistic? And I speak with CEOs from our clients pretty much every week. 2 conversations yesterday morning on pretty much the same subject matter. And first of all, I think there's something intrinsic in human nature which says, right, we've been through a crisis, therefore we have to get ourselves out of this. And so, the reasons for optimism, I think, are a sharp contrast to what was taking place last year, because nobody knew where this was going, and businesses and individuals were having to think the unthinkable in many ways. Let's also remind ourselves that there was a pretty strong debate during the course of the middle of last year about the end of globalisation.
Yes, there was.
Yeah, everybody was going back to national. It was coloured a little bit, of course, by global politics. But
and the way certain countries acted for themselves,
absolutely,
and said, don't care about the rest of the world. And it's the first time I saw international leadership disintegrating in front of me as they all fought, and there's still a bit of it going on now with the vaccines and different messages for different vaccines from different people. It's just politics gone mad, and of course I don't think Trump helped with his isolationist approach.
Yeah, but I think we've moved on from that so quickly. So that debate around global supply chains are not the future. That's gone, right?
It's gone.
And if anybody needed reminding of how interconnected the world is at the supply chain level, then look no further than what happened in the Suez Canal a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, absolutely,
right? Yeah. Where it's actually your local high street trader that's waiting for goods to restock their shelves that actually wasn't getting their supplies.
That's right.
So the interconnectedness of the global supply chain is there. So I think from a perspective of CEOs and clients that I speak to, there is an optimism to get ourselves out of this because of the sharpness and depth of the recessionary impacts of the pandemic. Effectively the whole global economy in many ways having to, or parts of it, significant parts of it, having to shut down almost overnight. Now, we won't come out at the same level. There will be, I'd argue, probably not 2 speeds, but 3, 4, 5, 6 different. It will be different by sector.
Yeah.
It will be different within geographies, within countries.
Yeah.
It will be different within winners and losers, even within industries,
yeah.
depending on the degree of adaptation and the readiness to digitise and change experiences. So the technology investment, I think, is going to be really, really key to the need to develop their growth agendas through and beyond this. I think the other thing is that the interest in overseas markets is really strong. So if you look at mature economies, whether you look at Western or Eastern economies, the reality is they're all looking at one another as regards export opportunities, growth opportunities. So the UK has been arguably in a curious place for the last sort of 6 months, because the run into the finality of Brexit being done, although of course the negotiations around all of the other contracts and agreements and treaties and everything else will go on for many, many years. But ultimately, that situation has put the UK in a spotlight internationally. We are, of course, uniquely positioned globally in terms of our geography. We're still a convener globally because of our curious position, literally in the middle of the world clock, if you will. We are incredibly well positioned because of our first language. We are incredibly well positioned because of our heavily regulated legal and financial services sectors. They provide stability. But when you look further afield, so I was speaking to colleagues in the US earlier this week. I speak to colleagues in the US most weeks. They are looking at their next trajectory of growth as an economy. Right? Post-pandemic, how did they as a nation grow much more quickly? Interestingly, when I speak then to colleagues on the other side of the world, Japan, China, and others, when you look at where they think their significant opportunities are, the UK has gone up the list on that, and you'll see more details as you'll publish, as you say, in the next edition. But most of the common features there is that they're also looking at the UK as an opportunity, right? So, and you can go into then maybe some of the European economies as well. So Germany particularly Germany very strong as a sort of
I saw that.
attractive market for UK exports. Of course, there are various industries that are super connected between the UK and Germany anyway. Many of them around us here in the heartland of industrial manufacturing, of course, in the West Midlands, aero, auto, etc. But they're also looking at the UK as an opportunity. So if you're a German supplier into the rail industry, you definitely want a piece of the action on HS2 because it's the biggest rail infrastructure project ongoing in Europe right now and will be for the next 10 years. So the UK's acceleration, policy acceleration, whatever your views are on HS2, the reality is as soon as those policy decisions are taken and we see the growth of infrastructure works right around us, we of course see the growth of universities, colleges, apprenticeships as a consequence of that as well. Those are the things that then the private sector can latch onto and spur on the growth at a different level. And that's why I think that the UK remains very keenly of interest to those in China, Germany, Japan, the US, and each of those markets relatively for one another as well. The US is still, above all else, I think the biggest single market opportunity for most.
Yeah, which is interesting because obviously prior to the pandemic, and of course, we've had the political machinations around Huawei and all the China thing. The US was good, but you're right, everybody's now looking at the US, and whether that's because of the political change and their view on globalization as opposed to America first. And of course, we were chatting before we commenced around cultural differences and how the Americans just have such a a positive outlook, regardless of what's going on around them. And whereas it's quite interesting when you look inside, whereas we're quite realistic as a British contingent. Now, before we go into what the UK CEOs thought, what other insights were there? I mean, I spotted well-being, climate change, cyber threats. What were CEOs around the world talking about those?
Lots. Look, I think if you look at the crisis of the last 12 months, the pandemic, it has uncovered various other crises as well. So, for example, the digital divide, all right? The haves and the have-nots with technology.
The K-shape.
Absolutely, right? It has, I think it has exacerbated the distrust in political institutions. You comment on policy. I'm not going to get too much into the politics, but I wouldn't want to second guess it or get too close to it. But I think the distrust in some political institutions, distrust in business actually. Yeah. Business trust has been at a pretty low ebb for many years. So this is an opportunity to reset for business as well, so long as business shows huge trust in its own people. Of the other major concerns, so if you looked beyond the survey, so cyber is right up there because most businesses that may have been thinking that they needed to cover the basic tracks of cyber threats now have to do that at a whole different level. So, and we have effectively a retained service for that with our clients, but we also have an emergency response type service because if you have an incident, as one client did quite noticeably a couple of years ago, where we hadn't received some emails from them for a couple of days, we thought it was very unusual, and I phoned the individual there who was providing us with the advice on a transaction, said, we really need to hear back from you on this. Our emails are down. We've had an attack. Okay. Ooh. Who's helping you with the attack? Oh, your cyber team are in there doing that with us. So, cyber is a huge concern, and of course the game keeps moving on. And I've sat in boardrooms with some clients where some of our cyber experts, who we recruited from all sorts of quite different organisations. I mean, you commented a couple of times, Ninder, where it's a firm of accountants. It's much, much more than that. If I told you that we've got people from the National Crime Agency and ex-GCHQ and such, like, the world of technology advancement, for all of its good and of all the commercial advantages, comes with some other things we need to manage, in particular cyber. And so it's just fascinating when you're in boardrooms to see our team play out live on screen the threats that are currently taking place, where they're coming from, and what systems they're trying to attack. There's a whole world in there that I personally don't yet fully understand, but it is a huge threat to business in terms of disruption. Well,
in a world where digitization is accelerating, alongside it comes the threat with cyber. Yep. So the more we digitize, the more it's going to happen. It's not just threats from hackers working independently, it's probably threats from industrial espionage, and dare we say it, and we won't go into it, political espionage, and but the cyber threats are just incredible.
It's really complex on cyber. But I think the other thing, and this is more of, was actually in the survey, the concern around the environment, and the environmental crises. Of course, we got COP26 being hosted in the UK. Right. Again, our convening power, centre of attention again.
That's right.
For the UK, which is a great opportunity. But if I took the litmus test of how interested our clients are when we run a seminar on Brexit or the pandemic, and then we talk about environment, net zero, carbon neutral, all of those terms are used interchangeably. It's that last one, net zero, that is of the hottest interest right now. So businesses that in the past may not have thought about it, and it's still relatively low in the priorities of the CEO surveys, but actually what I see and feel is that it's much more important to the businesses that we deal with. And bear in mind, and you reflected on this earlier, I always see ourselves as just a reflection of what our clients are doing.
That's right.
All right. Whether it's a local, privately owned and run family business here in the Midlands, or whether it's an internationally owned, global business that's based here significantly in the Midlands. And the reality is, they're all having to think about the environmental piece. Why? Because it goes straight to the heart of purpose. If you're going to continue to employ people as we do, it's our recruits today that are asking us the question. The accountability is with myself and others around what are we doing in terms of our policies as a business to change outcomes for the world. Now, we could look at the last 12 months and say, well, business travel is reduced by 90%. Maybe it actually was more than that at various points in time. We can all take, and this is where I think the power is in decision making individually, where you've got to trust people and give people flexibility, is if people choose to work from home in the longer term for maybe 2 or 3 days a week, then by definition we're each cutting our commuting carbon footprint by 40 to 60%.
What was interesting was that during pandemic, I read somewhere emissions were down dramatically. But I also read, and I could be wrong, but I also read that very recently emissions were up higher than the pandemic. And just an observation, and I think you're right about the next generation looking through a different lens. I also see in businesses, depending who's running it, if it's an older generation, they see it through a different lens totally. They think, well, what's all the fuss? And of course, in the Black Country, and again, just an observation, the energy is a moot point around the environment. And of course, detractors will say, but China, India, and the US are still spewing out loads, and it means that operators in this country are at a competitive disadvantage because we're doing everything we can, but others aren't, and so there is that sentiment.
Yeah, and I can understand where that sentiment emanates from, and some of those facts are unarguable, but that doesn't mean you go to the lowest common denominator. No. And I think we have an opportunity to be a world leader in our approach, and in fact, it's in our. Let's be really clear. It's in our local economic interest for us to be a world leader on this. We have generated so much economic growth in the region from industrial manufacturing and, dare I even say, the internal combustion engine.
Yeah,
that's right. It's in the interest of the supply chain that is the fabric of a big chunk of this economy that we go through that transition. So, look, there are a series of choices that people can make, and we've signed up to a number of initiative charters as well as our own policies about the steps that individuals can take. So this falls into two categories for me. What in terms of CEO survey, what can the CEO and that business make as their decisions about their impact? So as an example, the building we're in is BREEAM excellent, right? We don't move to new premises unless they are BREEAM excellent in terms of emissions. But likewise, how can we guide our people? We talked a lot earlier about health and well-being. Equally, how can we guide and inform our people around the choices that they make? And the reality is that is not a one-way street. We're equally being informed by our people, many of whom are really, really passionate about this subject and telling us what we should do as well. So, we talked a lot about the surveying of staff. That's where we get the richness of that dialogue really running. But it's going to be so important for this city. I mean, obviously we go to a low emission zone essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
On the 1st of June, and that's been delayed. Needs to happen. We need to make the change. We also need to create things that are sustainable choices for people, not just around transportation, but around food miles, energy consumption, and the rest.
Let's come back local, but just before I do that, for those who wondered what I was muttering about when I said K-shape, and what I mean by the K-shape is that the recovery is great for some people, so it goes northerly direction, and for certain people who've had to, say, get the lower jobs, they have a southerly, that's what gives you a K-shape as well. Now, let's come to the local then. You're a big employer, you have a big role to play within the city of Birmingham, as will be your Belfast office, as well as other offices. The role of cities, the role of towns, regeneration in a post-pandemic situation. Now, we've talked about the hybrid. We could talk about high street infrastructure. I'm a chair of the Wolverhampton Towns Fund, so we've had some money in as of Sandwell and a few other boroughs. What's your role then as PwC, and how do you see the role of cities, towns, and regeneration? So let's come now from the big global picture. We've got an idea now how that's happening. Now let's get down to here. And this region, by the way, is no different to any other region. So people listening in Leeds or in London, I mean, London's an interesting situation in itself as the main. So what are your thoughts on that? And then I want to pick up, perhaps when we get through that, just a couple of things you wrote in the current edition about your views on how we should operate locally and regionally. So just some insights into that, then, Matt.
So, in terms of, let's just take it as our view as an organisation, first of all. We feel we have a role to support the businesses that support us. Now, that goes directly to our suppliers. We've roughly 2,000 suppliers to our UK business. And at the start of the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that they were looked after and protected as much as they could. And you've experienced some of those suppliers yourself this morning, because you were greeted by our welcome hosts, our security team, our housekeeping staff, our kitchen. All of those suppliers into businesses are really important. So we've kept that running.
Is that what you mean by local ecosystem?
That's part of the local ecosystem.
Okay.
Right. That's the bit that we can directly control.
Yeah.
That's the bit that where the firms spend is directly controlled. Your point earlier, though, around the multiplier effect is for every business, and we're looking out here on some glass and steel towers essentially in the city centre. Whether I'm looking at a bank or a cultural organisation or a high street business, right? All of those, to various degrees, are supported. They're interactions, there are transactions between our people and those businesses, and we're not a business that mandates things with our people. We talk about our purpose more widely as a business, and how as individuals we can support them. Now, there's been a lot of focus over the last 12 months on supporting various community interests and charities, of course, but I think in particular the ecosystem of city and town centres and how we support that is really key to how we come through this. We have the benefit, as we kind of look around us here, we have the benefit of one of the best symphony halls in the world. We have a great theatre. We have a great library. We have fantastic art galleries, coffee shops. We have brilliant selections of restaurants. For all of us we've been constrained, haven't we, from what we can do over the course of the last 12 months. It's been unusual. For those for whom, in your K shape, they've been on the top of that K.
Yeah.
This is a personal view. There is an obligation to go out and support those businesses that have built themselves up around where we build ourselves. And whether we go back to the hybrid model where actually it's a proportion of the time where colleagues are co-located, the reality is we've got to create the opportunities and the experiences, and our people and their clients and colleagues have got to find their experiences and why they use the facilities that have been built up around them.
So are you going hybrid? Because Twitter are saying stay at home, never come back.
Yep.
Goldman Sachs are saying, you're all coming back. Listen, you're all coming back. What's PwC's stance on this?
Yeah, I mean, hybrid is I guess an important phrase, because I think we will be in hybrid, and we wanted to be listening, most importantly, to our people through the pulse surveys that we've done over the course of the last 12 months, as well as looking at what we need to do as a business. And so what does hybrid really mean? Right, let's be really clear about what hybrid means, because people have used the phrase work-life balance for decades, and everybody's got a slightly different take on what work-life balance is. So the hybrid model is that first of all, you have a proportion of time that is spent with colleagues co-located. Now, that could be co-located in One Chamberlain Square or Belfast or Bradford or whichever one of our other places of work. It could be co-located at a client site, depending on the client's approach to hosting teams from external organisations. We certainly have a view that we want to host here. We've created a very COVID-safe environment for clients, colleagues, communities and other visitors. So the hybrid for us is about how we adapt our space and the working model. So we've got to do some adaptation, because it's all very well doing, whether it's Google or some other software provider that is providing your virtual conferencing systems. What happens when you have part of the client team and part of the PwC team in one place and a number of others dispersed? We've all been used to working on the sort of 15-minute or the 30-minute or on the hour schedules, but actually when you're back in person or mixed, the technology needs to be slightly different and the facilities we build need to be slightly different. The second key thing about hybrid is what we would call the empowered day. So we literally have just launched for our staff across the UK an empowered day. Right. So what does that mean? Right. We trust our people enough that they can choose largely how, when and where they want to work. The expectation, and this is our people speaking to us rather than us policy setting, is that most people got into this sweet spot of I would be back in my traditional workplace something like 2 to 3 days a week. Right? And that's where we were previously in some regards, because a lot of our people would be permanently out on client sites, very rarely in the PwC workplace. But the empowered day means that if somebody is at their best, for example, or has other caring responsibilities or other demands on their time that requires them to be working at 6 o'clock in the morning and stopping at maybe 11 o'clock and doing something else they need to do and then switching back on at 3 and working until whatever, that flexibility completely exists for people. And I think as we go through this, first of all, there are some aspects of it that will be people seeing the explicit permission for some of the changes in behaviours we've seen over the course of the last 12 months. I mentioned earlier, for a lot of people, commuting time's gone and the working day's extended, not shortened. Right, so we have to look at that sensibly as an employer to say, are we going to get the best performance out of our people if they're just doing more of the time? And the reality is we have to give people that permission and that trust to make their choices about when they are best able also to perform. There is an overrider on it, which is that the client delivery, what we're delivering for clients, clearly has to come first. All right, and so we cannot sort of drift into something that becomes a hybrid that doesn't work for clients. We are a client service business ultimately across all of our disciplines. The next step of it, and this is it sits within that sort of hybridization in many ways, is how much travelling are we going to do? Right. So go back to what we were talking about in terms of environmental footprint, net zero, etc. I would typically be on a train to London a couple of times a week. I haven't been to London since the end of last February.
Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, as our senior partner, has indicated really clearly, and I think it's an important communication from leadership, that he's somebody that would jump on a plane most Sunday evenings and be travelling either in Europe or further afield around the world. Kevin's expectation is that he will do 1 in 3 of those trips. That's a really significant impact on time, where you make your choices about how you work. And I think the same will be true for lots of us, then thinking about much more consciously about when we are together, when we're co-located, what do we want to do with that time? So we're thinking through how we created a concept in this building in 1 Chamberlain Square of hackable space. Right. I think it was before its time. All right. If I'm completely honest, we were experimenting a little bit with the hackable spaces. We've got 2 on each floor in the building. Modular furniture that can be moved. I'm wanting to introduce equipment into those spaces that will help people get the best out of that hybrid environment, where some people are remote, some people are in the office. But the travelling part of it then becomes optional for people. It becomes completely possible for people to think, well, I can do the hybrid today of my empowered day, even though part of the client team and part of the PwC team are working together in one co-located place. That's the hybrid. The last bit of the experiment is what we're going to do over the summer, which is a compressed working week. Now, we've never done this before, and the compressed working week is such that, as a number of people have given examples around it, is if you can get done what you need to get done in your normal working week in that 4.5 day period, and this is just an experiment through the summer, July and August, is then literally switch off, start your weekend on a Friday afternoon. Yeah. That won't work for everybody. We mentioned earlier, there are parts of our business and if this could equally apply to an audit or tax work or a cyber project or a transaction, it could be anything. That isn't going to work every time for every person. But the fact that we're again creating that space for people to work in their empowered day to get the optimum out of themselves with all the other support we provide around them, and then actually get some proper time to rest, recover, recuperate, that's all about human performance. Right, professional services has been brought up in an environment where, exams, work hard, more exams, progress, more in terms of what you do in your career. But actually what we know from other vocations and professions is that recovery time is really important. And recovery time in particular, not just from the regular intensity of business as usual, but from the different intensity of people typically being on screens 7, 8, 9 hours a day. I mean, all our devices tell us how long we've been on the screens for every week anyway. But you need rest and recuperation and recovery from that to perform at your best the following week.
But they've been talking about a 4-day week for quite a while. So this almost seems a halfway house to 4.5 day. And of course, the other thing.
But it could be any time in the week. Somebody could say, could say, for example, actually, I've compressed my hours. So think of the two together, particularly through a summer period, when we do need people to recover. Basic stuff. People haven't had very much vitamin D for the last 6 months. Right? Is if their empowered day and their compressed week means that they're not working on a Wednesday afternoon, if that's what suits them best because they've got some deadlines on a Friday afternoon, so be it. That's the level of dialogue and trust that we have in our people and vice versa. Yeah,
I mean, there is that question about blue sky thinking and that we don't have time for blue sky thinking. Well, look, time is pressing. Mm-hmm. I was going to pick up these other stuff, but it's going to be difficult. So let me just tell you some of your thoughts, and I want people then to read about them. They can go on the digital or get a copy. So you've said some brilliant things, really brilliant things. Let me read some of them out. Mm-hmm. We won't have time to discuss them, but it just gives. So you've said things like opening our eyes and minds even further to global systems, trends and markets requires genuinely diverse teams from different demographics and backgrounds. You talk about looking at your skills capacity workforce. You talk about a region needs to look at its leadership, how diverse it is. You talk about organisations needing a cultural purpose. You talk about the David versus Goliath technology battle. Yep. Some really good stuff, and maybe I'll just have to grab you another time and go through that. And also, there's a great book that's just been
I'll
published.
Reference that actually.
Yeah, and then. There's a book called, which I thought was fascinating. It's the 10
Years to Midnight. Okay, this is written by a colleague and co-authored by a number of others, but it's written by a colleague called Blair Shepherd. Blair was a partner in our US firm, super experienced individual, and wrote this text actually pre-pandemic.
Okay, pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, and it looks essentially at the other global crises before the pandemic even emerged, right? And that is about the asymmetry of opportunity. It's about the distrust, as we touched a little bit on this, distrust in some of the traditional sort of benchmark institutions, government, business, other institutions that guide our lives, technology. And the digital divide that's emerged, so it's sort of before its time maybe as a text, and then of course the disparity of opportunity depending on socioeconomic background, ethnic background, and such like. So there are many other things that are covered in that text. I'd thoroughly recommend it as a read, whether you're a C-suite. Or whether you're a reverse mentor to C-suite or from any other part of organisations, it's pretty thought-provoking. It can be covered in a weekend, or maybe for those when they do get back to any form of kind of normal work of commuting, even if it's just a part of the week, then a few days of train trips, and I'm sure that text would get done.
Right, so a reminder for anybody watching this or listening, 10 Years to Midnight is worth reading. Let me very quickly repeat the fantastic advice you gave in the issuance. I'm just going to read the bullet points out. So you refer to creating a flourishing local economic ecosystem. We talked about that, buying local. You've talked about the importance of levelling up, so that's where we need joint working between private and public sector. You talk about accelerating the recruitment and skills capacity of the workforce, particularly in the digital space. You talk about the importance of leadership and the importance of leadership that is diverse. You talk about having a cultural purpose to organisations. You talk about lifting your horizons, look for the bigger world. There's a bigger world out there. And post-Brexit, again, we didn't have time, but maybe again another time, you're talking about how now to deal with a world that's probably, and you're absolutely right, it's now even more globalised. People understand the supply chain and how to get in. You talk about the David and Goliath and how technology can now bridge that, and actually you can now compete with the big boys. Big technology allows you to do that. You talk about being internationally relevant and the new norm. I love this next one, business at its best.
Yep.
And I don't think for too long, you're absolutely right, business hasn't been where it should be in terms of its voice. I think the pandemic has showed some brilliant businesses doing some brilliant stuff. There's been some sharp practices as well, and I think it'll be interesting what people think post-pandemic of business. And you talked about the optimization of the interconnectedness of the global platforms. So, not just that book, but if you want to really have a real good idea of what Matt's talking about, speaking about, I love this. Your conclusion in the article was there is much to be done to restore the global economy, health and well-being. Let's proceed with speed. I love that. I think that was really good. And you talked about speeding of the decision making in your earlier. So I'm now going to finish with, I don't know, you may not find this a difficult question, but I have to ask you this question. So there's a white paper on audit reform coming up.
Yep.
Littered. The audit sector has been littered with problems, going back as far as Enron, BHS. The Germans had their Wirecard. Mm-hmm. Locally, we had our Carillion. Commentators are saying it's a cultural problem, and maybe we should split audit and our advisory. And really, your concluding remarks on that?
Yeah, my concluding remarks on it, right, a few key things to mention. First of all, look, we welcome, actually, the consultation and the discussion on it. We have long been saying that there is a need to increase the need of audit quality, right, and actually clarify what audit is and what it isn't. So it's a welcomed paper for ourselves. We have been encouraging our clients to participate in that debate for some time as well. In fact, we started a debate around the future of audit a couple of years ago, just to try and engender much more discussion about this. And in fact, if you looked at this, may surprise actually some listeners, the highest proportion of any cohort that are the users of accounts currently, as in audited financial statements, are students. All right, so it's not just investor populations and the capital markets, but also many other readers, and that's important. So for us, I think it's really important that we get that debate and that discussion running hot. Secondly, it's really clear now that whereas the consultation may have been seen in the past as something that was specific to the audit profession and our profession, the dawning reality now is that is relevant for boards, non-executive directors, CEOs, chairs, etc. It is a move closer towards almost a US type consultation of what we saw previously with Sarbanes-Oxley. So right now, boards are very interested in the discussion and the debate, and are contributing to that as well. And lastly, and this goes back to many areas of the complexity of what we've been dealing with, and what we've talked about over the course of this discussion, Ninder, which is that many of the challenges the clients face are the most complex that they've ever been. We've talked about traditional industries, new industries, we talked about technology, we talked about digital disruption, and many other areas. The reality is that the multidisciplinary firm that we are, with all the richness of the different backgrounds, experiences, qualifications is actually what most of our clients need. And therefore, being able to bring the whole of that to the right situations at the right time is fundamentally a part of what we do. It's absolutely core to our purpose as a business, and we strongly believe in a multidisciplinary firm going forward as well, but with audit quality very much at the centre of that.
Let me conclude. I thought I'd walked into an accountancy firm, but I haven't. Mm-hmm. I've walked into a business that looks at business holistically. I didn't think I'd end up spending most of the time talking about human behaviour, about soft skills. Remember, accountancy. I didn't know I'd get such an in-depth understanding of the word hybrid. We've talked about cyber threats, digitisation. We've talked about net zero. We talked about cities, towns, and then we ended up with audit reform. It's been a fascinating... Sorry, we didn't cover half of what I wanted to cover, and I suspect I may have to come back in again. I was going to finish with this last question, very, very last question, but I'm just going to hint at it, and I'm not going to put you in a position to answer. You're Welsh. I wonder who you support when it comes to rugby. Matt, listen, it's been great chatting to you, and I'm sure we'll catch up again. Thank you very much for your time. And don't forget, everyone, 10 years to midnight. And also, if you haven't read a brilliant in the third issue of the Business Influence, a really fascinating piece by Matt, and of course the CEO survey in the next issue as well. Matt, thanks very much for your hospitality.
Thanks, Ninder, and a pleasure to host you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon here.
Thank you.